The A-flat major prelude from the Book 2 is another of these absolutely wonderful preludes which elevates the whole of the Book 2 into a higher plane. And it is probably the longest prelude, for one thing, which is not in two parts. Quite a lot of the preludes in the Book 2 are in two parts, in the sort of ancestor of the sonata form. This one is in one part, and it is the longest of them, and it's a sort of tour de force and a triumph in working out with limited material and no real sense of contrast, and creating a large-scale piece which completely works. And I say no contrast. In some ways, I feel this prelude is doing successfully what the G sharp minor that was the preceding episode didn't quite manage for me. There is a sort of set of contrast in the sense that the two ideas at the beginning are expressed in the first two bars. So that would be the first one, and then the continuation. And then, yeah. And then he works with that, and they are very quickly integrated in the sense that this becomes. And this becomes. So together it. So the goal clearly is a marriage of these two slightly contrasted type of material. In that way, and in many other ways, this prelude is not dissimilar to the F sharp major of the second book. In fact, so similar that, yes, well, it's possible to think that Bach might have been weary to put them both in the collection, because, I mean, between that. There is more than a passing affinity in character, in mood, in rhythmic treatment, and but this one, in some ways, goes even further in the richness of the invention and the way he, without ever fundamentally changing the nature of his ideas, he managed to make them morph so that the piece will move into a different direction. So that after a point we reach the moment where we have this and that is somewhat new, and yet it is still the same thing and the same material. And again, 2/3 of the way we come to an idea which so the same thing, this is absolutely derived from the opening two bars, and yet it's somewhat different, and still completely integrated to the general form. So it is. I really feel that prelude is quite extraordinary, and one of the highlights of the second book. The fugue is amusing for probably at least two reasons. It has very typical Bach. That it's subject, and it's there is nothing very striking about it. It's like a subject we have, a kind of subject we have heard many times. The counter subject is something that we have encountered quite a few times, and it seems to keep coming in the Well Tempered, the lamento. which is not again something one would have associated with that subject, which is fairly good-natured, if you want. It seems to want to undermine this good-naturedness of the subject by instigating this element of underlying pain. I mean, there is no doubt that a listener with any culture of the period would hear that line and would understand it as a lamento, and therefore a lament. So the mixture of the two is somewhat puzzling, but then it's not the first time it happens in the Well Tempered. The most striking example was in the Book 1, in fact, the A major prelude. That was very strange. Now, the other thing baffling about this fugue is that, well, it's a 4-part fugue, but when you play it, you come to realize that actually it almost never has 4 parts. 90% of the time you are playing a very strict 3-part fugue, meaning that there is always one voice which is silent. And then that voice comes again, but then another one becomes silent. So you come to wonder, well, why didn't Bach write a 3-part fugue? And well, there is an answer to that, and I will come to it. But, I mean, quite typically, even the 4th entry of the subject, which is normally the moment where everything comes together for the first time, that even doesn't happen because the second voice shuts off at that point, so that we still find ourselves in 3 voices. So here is the 3rd entry. And here's the 4th. But because that voice stops here, we feel nothing has changed in the balance. It's not a richer texture. So occasionally you have little dots of a 4th voice coming through, but very rarely, and one feels almost like it's an add-on, and that Bach felt he has to make use of his 4th voice. It sort of comes into its own at the end, and I suppose that is why, despite everything this fugue has for voice, there is a tremendous build up in that fugue. The texture becomes more and more dense, and so by the end, the 4th voice, but very late in fact, in the last 2 lines of the piece, the 4th voice really come together, the 4 voices come together, and in fact the texture becomes almost no longer contrapuntal but chord-like, almost classical. And even more interestingly, Bach keeps piling on more and more, so that by the last 3 bars, in fact, you find yourself with 5 voices, not 4. And this final chord has 6 notes. So we start really a fugue with 3 voices, then the 4th makes his definitive appearance on the last 2 lines. In the last 2 bars you get a 5th voice which somehow managed to sneak in, and the very last chord has 6 notes, which means 6 voices in effect. So there is a real sense of progression and that of the fugue building to a climax.